how do emotions and feelings work together with moods? So what's the difference between emotions, feelings, and moods? The short answer is time. You see something or hear something or think something, and you have an almost instantaneous, automatic physiological reaction. There's this little window of time when these chemicals of emotions start flooding into you, and then they start affecting your different systems and cells. And because emotion chemicals affect every part of you, from your thinking to all of your physiology, these emotions start to go into your body and they start to go to work. And then you start to feel them. You start to have a sensation. Just think about that idea that your emotion chemicals are regulating every part of your bodily system. And at some point you start to perceive them. You literally feel your feelings. Just in terms of the difference between feelings, emotions, and moods. First comes emotion, and then the chemicals start to affect us, and it becomes feelings. And then over time, these multiple different feelings that we have begin to merge together into a mood. And the mood lasts longer. And I'll explain to you later why this time is so important and how we're adapted to have these short and longer emotional reactions to help us survive and thrive. So let's dig in to a bit of the neuroscience of emotion. Now, you might have seen some of our other videos where we really go into what emotions are made of and how they work. But I want to just talk in more general terms about this idea of what emotions are doing in our brains and bodies. There's some fascinating work by Lisa Feldman Barrett where she's suggesting that actually we're creating our emotions on the fly as a kind of emergent property. And there's a whole bunch of neuroscience researchers who talk about emergent theories of emotions. Emergent, what does that mean? Well, I'm a beekeeper, and one of the things that's fascinating about bees is that the hives learn. They have an emergent learning process. A bee flies out, it finds some nectar, it comes back, it does a little dance, and in that little dance, it communicates with the hive. But it's not that the whole hive now gets the message. A few bees get the message. And a few more bees go out and they find that little patch of flowers and they come back and they do a little dance and they tell some more bees and then they go out. And pretty soon, thousands of bees have this information. It's an emergent learning process. The hive as a collective is learning about the environment, and individual bees are sharing information with other bees, and more of the bees learn. This emergent idea of emotions says that we're constantly producing all of the emotion chemicals that we need just in case. And we then we notice something and we say, oh, I needed that emotion. Let me bring out more of it. And we have this emergent status where we're adapting the environment in almost real time as these emotion chemicals are helping to regulate us and have our thinking and our physiology work together with the situation that we're in. Now, of course, this is all based on our perceptions. There's some incredibly interesting research about teaching people who are blind to see with their tongues. They did these studies where they were creating these electrode plates, and they could put this electrode plate on a blind person's tongue, and they could stimulate the production of certain chemical signals. And in this research, they were able to help blind people actually be able to see by stimulating these chemical signals. Now just think about that for a second. You look around, you see the lights, you see what kind of day it is, you see your flowers on the table. There's no light in your brain. Let that sink in for a second. There's no light in your brain. So everything that you're seeing is actually a chemical print, a chemical model of the environment around you. You have your perceptions and they're converted into chemicals. Emotions are also chemicals that help us understand our environment. So we have chemicals for taste, we have chemicals for light, we have chemicals for emotions. And all of them, in very similar ways, help us read the situation that we're in and adapt in order to survive and thrive. That's the basic physiological function of emotion. And we're creating these chemicals in our brains, but also in our bodies, especially around our hearts, in our guts, in our spines, everywhere. Candace Pert, a neuroscientist who was one of our advisory board members, said that it's almost like a second communication system. We have these long branching cells that help us carry information between our brains and bodies. We also have these chemicals of emotion that carry information, and they're helping us get ready. They're helping us adapt. And it's all based on what we're perceiving, because there's no light in our brain. It's not about what's real. It's about how we're perceiving the world inside us and around us. And these emotion signals are happening even if we're unconscious of them. You can be somebody who says, I don't believe in all this emotion mumbo jumbo. And guess what? That was emotion that was triggering that thought. It's actually emotion that's triggering what you believe is true and untrue. It's emotion that's deciding what you perceive as important or not important. And that's happening at a foundational physiological level, whether you pay attention to it or not, whether you believe in it or not. Science doesn't care. But what's interesting about emotions is that when you do pay attention to them, you can become more accurate and clear, and this data starts to make more sense. And this is really important as we move to the next step and we start paying attention to what feelings are and what feelings are telling us. There's so many interesting things about feelings. So you remember the idea is that emotions are released. These chemicals are produced all over our brains and bodies. And then these chemicals start running around, changing our physiology, changing our thinking. Literally all of our bodily systems. One time my uncle, Dr. Will Evans, and I were talking about this. And he said it's interesting how in all of our physiological systems, our blood system, our breathing, our endocrine system, when those things get blocked or they're not flowing properly, we have a problem. And Chinese medicine talks about this too, the flow of energy in our bodies. And when it's blocked, there's a problem. What if the same thing is true with our emotion systems? What if the natural, healthy state of our emotions is to flow? I remember when my children were babies and they would get really angry and their bodies would turn red. The emotions released, they starts affecting everything in their bodies. Their capillaries are expanding, so they turn red. And that feeling is washing through them. And then like a storm in the summertime, blowing out, and it's done. Now that is a flowing state of feelings. When the emotion starts to go to work in us, all of these bodily systems start to be affected. We have this really cool thing called a biodot, and we use it for teaching about feelings because when you put a biodot on your hand, it starts to change temperature based on your emotional state. Well, why would that happen? Well, because when you're a little bit stressed, your capillaries at your extremities start to close down to keep more blood in your trunk. You don't even have to notice that you're stressed for this to happen. There's an amazing tool called a heart rate variability monitor. And your heart rate is not actually consistent. Your heart rate, ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. You might not even notice it unless you're going to a really extreme level of arrhythmia, and then you better go to the hospital. In our daily lives, the rhythm of our heart is actually changing, not just the frequency, but how consistent it is, the variability of the heart rate. And there's a lot of work by our friends at HeartMath where they've been studying how our feelings are changing the variability of our heart rate. And just by breathing deeply and actively doing some appreciation and practicing a state of being in the zone, we can actually make our hearts beat more evenly, which is correlated with a physiological state of readiness and openness. It's when the biodot's turning green, and we're in a place where we're in an optimal state for thinking and learning and growth and adapting. So this physiological signal, it's very subtle. It's automatically happening. Our skin temperature, our heart rate, and of course our thinking. When we are feeling fear, not just the emotion, but it starts to work in us, and we might feel a little tremble, we might feel that little tremor in our voice. What it's doing to our thinking is it's saying, hey, pay attention, there's a risk. When we're excited and you can feel your heart beating and your breathing becomes a little more shallow, interestingly, it's quite a lot like the physiological response to stress. It's our body saying to us, hey, there's some possibility here. Take a look at it. There's actually some great research on stress and how this physiological reaction to stress and the physiological reaction to excitement are so similar. Kelly McGonigal wrote a whole book about this, The Upside of Stress, and we have a great article on our website. But what she said is that because the physiological signals of stress and excitement are so similar, if we simply shift our thinking, when we feel stressed, we say, what's exciting me in this situation? And she reports research in her book that says that people who have heart disease, who just make that one little shift, they have 30% less chance of dying from the heart disease. So we're talking about an important interconnection between our physiology and our emotions. And that's what feelings are. Feelings are the bridge between the raw emotion and the physiological and cognitive experience. Because remember, our brains are part of our bodies too. So our emotions, as they start to go to work on all these different cells, they're affecting every system, including our thinking systems. When it comes to feelings, one of the big myths is about positive and negative feelings. People say, I want to have more positive feeling. And what they mean by that is they want to have more feelings like excitement and joy. Of course, those feelings aren't appropriate all the time, and they're not even useful all the time. Happiness is wonderful, but it turns out sorrow is pretty wonderful too when you're losing someone or you're in a difficult circumstance. We need to use the right feeling for the situation that we're in. Now, in one of our other videos, we talked about the Plutchik model, which is a fantastic structure for looking at different emotions and feelings. But I also want to share something that we call the feeling log. And in my book, At the Heart of Leadership, we talk all about the feeling log and how to use it as a manager. It's a really simple model, and Mark Brackett from Yale uses this in his work with emotions. He calls it the mood meter. The feeling log is just two axes. How intense is the feeling? Whoa, it's really intense! Or, so intense. And on the other axis, how pleasant is it? Oh, this feels great! Or, this is difficult. And we don't need to be in judgment that one of those is good or bad. In fact, you have 4 quadrants, and each of the quadrants does something different. When you're in that top left quadrant, that tells you there's a big problem. When you're in the bottom left quadrant, it's a small problem, and it's causing you to focus, to pay attention to little errors. And here's an interesting fact from Peter Salovey, one of the original scientists who discovered emotional intelligence, together with his colleague Jack Mayer. Peter says that you are actually more accurate at computational tasks when you're in that slightly unpleasant mood, when you're in that quadrant 2. Quadrant 3 is about recovery and rest. It's about openness. It's about readiness for what's next. And quadrant 4 is about giving you energy to move forward and take risks and try things. Now, any of you who are parents will know sometimes people are in quadrant 4, especially little people bouncing off the walls, and you say, hey, it's time to calm down a little bit. So in other words, you don't think quadrant 4 is all that positive when it's bedtime. Or I used to be a middle school teacher, and when my middle school students were in quadrant 4, sometimes I'd say, okay, let's take a moment and do some breathing because we need to come back down to quadrant 3, or even shift over to quadrant 2 so we can do a better job learning. And if you're somebody who's dealing with significant crisis or challenge, you might actually want to be and want your people to be in quadrant 1 to confront the intensity of the challenge. So here's a little exercise for you. We'll put the notes in the description of the video so you can download a worksheet for this and some more instructions. But I just want you to take a moment and notice how intense is the feeling you're in right now. And if it's a really low level of intensity, maybe it's down at a 0 or 1, or it could be kind of in the middle, or could be, wow, it's really sizzling, strong intensity feeling up at the top. And how pleasant is it? Is it something that you're struggling with or grappling with or having a hard time with? It's over in quadrant 1 or 2. If it's something that feels pleasant and fun and engaging and wants you to move forward, it's in quadrant 3 or 4. So just take a moment and don't even name the feeling. Just draw that little diagram and put your finger where your feelings are now. And then consider quadrant 1, big problems. Pay attention. Quadrant 2, these feelings are telling you small challenges. Focus in. Quadrant 3, recover, relax, take a break. Quadrant 4, let's go. So in other words, our feelings are causing us to narrow our attention towards problems or expand our attention towards opportunities, and our feelings are motivating us to move forward or move back. Now, as we start to get more and more of these different feeling states, and remember I mentioned Lisa Feldman Barrett's research, that we have all of these different feelings at the same time. And in 6 seconds, we always say you have more than one feeling at a time. What's beneath that feeling? So you have that one feeling that you were noticing. Maybe that's like the loud voice calling for attention. But there are other quieter feelings that might be hiding in the background. And as you look beneath that first feeling, and we actually have a video about this, about my favorite question for coaching and looking at the emotions, you start to notice the feelings that might be hiding in the background. And you can actually, on this 4 quadrant, you can actually graph a whole bunch of different feelings and notice your state right now. It's important to get clear on your feelings before we go into moods, because moods can be really confusing. They're more generalized, and they're a mixture of a lot of different feeling data that's going to kind of flow together into this new state, physical, mental, emotional state or condition that we're going to experience as a mood. A mood is a semi-persistent mixture of emotional, physical, and cognitive state. In other words, it's got some thinking, it's got some feeling, and it's got some physiology. Why do we have moods? Well, if you think about a situation where you're in a stressful circumstance, and maybe you're in a conflict with somebody, there's a very good chance that that's not just going to get resolved in a few seconds. And as you've learned in some of our other videos, emotions are actually only last for a short period of time. So the purpose of a mood is to help us stay ready for what might be coming next. And this is why the mood that we're in changes what we perceive. And we actually start to pick up signals that match the mood that we're in. It's because if you're in a, let's just say, anxious mood, it means that there's a generalized sense of threat. You're not exactly sure what the problem is, but there might be something out there that you need to pay attention to. There's some danger lurking. And so you have this mood that actually is designed by evolution to help you pay attention to these potential risks. And it causes you to notice more things that are risky. So our moods are basically a way of generalizing the feeling state over a longer period of time. What's interesting about this, remember the emotion is very specific. We perceive something and we have this almost instantaneous emotional reaction. And then these chemicals start to work in our brains and bodies. They start changing our systems and we start to feel our feelings. And then over time, we have more and more of these things coming together into what we call a mood. This means that the mood is both longer lasting and more general. It's a way for us to sense and pick up and adapt to the environment around us as well as the environment inside us. And that's why other people's feelings have a big impact on our mood. The lighting affects our mood. What we eat. What you ate yesterday affects your mood today. There's some intriguing research where they fed rats probiotic foods. And then a day later, they put them into a test. And they saw that the rats who ate the probiotic yogurt were less volatile and reactive than the rats who didn't. So that means that the emotional reaction might be automatic, but we are setting the conditions in which that automatic reaction takes place. This is why things like exercise and diet and getting good sleep are actually an important part of our mental health. because we're setting up the conditions in which the reactions are going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next day. So your choices today are setting up the state that you're going to be in when you come into a situation in the future. You need to assess your mood and the situation. Because moods are generalized, we often have a mood that we've been carrying forward from the past, and it may no longer be useful to us. Just for example, let's say we had a lot of conflict yesterday, and we were in a really agitated, stressed, anxious mood as a result of that. And we didn't do anything to change it. And we could wake up today and we're still in that agitated, stressed mood, maybe even more because we didn't sleep very well, maybe we didn't go and do any exercise, maybe we didn't have a good meal. We wake up in the morning and now we're already predisposed to have more of this anxious volatility. That's useful if we're continuing to be in an anxious and volatile situation and we need to watch out for threats and be protective. But what if we actually want to be in a different situation today? What if we are in a different circumstance or with different people or we're trying to create some change? Moods have this persistency effect that's useful if you're in the same conditions. But if you want to change, the mood can become an obstacle for creating the change that you're looking for today. And so it's important to notice the mood and then to do the work to change it. And it's actually not that hard to change your mood because there's so many different variables that affect our mood. Sometimes just reading a cartoon, talking to somebody, writing, journaling, going for a run, doing a little bit of exercise, eating some probiotic yogurt, being out in the sun, stretching, all of these things can start to shift our mood. We can think about it like a paint box, and we put in a bunch of colors yesterday, and the picture is looking like this. But if we want to change that, we can start adding a little bit of a new color, and then a little bit of a new one, a little bit of a new one, and pretty soon we have a very different picture. We have a very different context in which we're noticing emotional data and using that data to help us adapt to the world that's inside us and around us. So to recap, what's the difference between emotions, feelings, and moods? The simple answer is time. But you've learned a lot more about the physiology of emotions and how emotions are automatically produced almost instantaneously, and then they start to go to work on our brains and bodies, and we feel them. They change our thinking, they change our physiology. And as these changes start to mount up over time, they become moods, a more generalized state that's going to last a little bit longer. Interestingly, in all three parts, there are different emotional intelligence strategies that you can use. For example, in the first stage with emotions, it's noticing this data, these quickly fleeting signals. You only have this little 6-second window of opportunity to pay attention and say, hey, something's happening here. And then as we get into feelings and noticing these different feeling states happening, being able to name them and understand them, I feel this because, and I also feel this, and I also feel this. And not just staying on the surface level, but looking at what's underneath. And then when we get to moods, taking responsibility for the mood that we're in. Is this a mood that's really going to help me? And doing those simple things that can help us shift our mood so that we create the conditions for the emotional reactions that are actually going to help us. And that's how we use emotional intelligence in our daily lives to prepare ourselves for what's to come, to notice this data and to get the meaning from it so we can solve the challenges that are in front of us. Hi, I'm Josh Freedman. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please share it, like it, subscribe, comment. That really helps us with our work to bring emotional intelligence to everyone in the world. These are skills that are really needed in the world right now, and we need you to help us help others.